3rd, 2022. Kathy Beal here, and I am talking to Jeffrey Eaton, who has a different name as well, which we will discuss in a minute. The author of the Murder Becomes mystery series. Here's the latest one, I believe. Murder Becomes Mayfair. Murder Becomes Manhattan was the first. Reading a tiny excerpt from multiple bios, multiple names, multiple bios. Anyone have an idea already what we're dealing with here? Gemini. So his professional bio starts with the name that I'll bust him with. Jeff Harrington has had one of those careers that may make you want to slap him. All right, so Jeffrey Eaton, Jeff Harrington, I will welcome. Thank you for wanting to talk.
Thank you for having me, Kathy. I look forward to talking with everyone here, and I really appreciate the invitation of being a part of this wonderful online event. So
let me explain to everybody. Jeff and I have known each other since, I am pretty certain, my very first day of college. We had 2 classes together our first semester, and one of them was physical anthropology. And my memory is that in this huge auditorium, we ended up sitting next to each other. That's my memory.
Wow. I forgot about that. I completely forgot we had anthropology together.
Right, because we also had news reporting together, and that's what made us figure out who the other one was. So we'll just leave it at that. Anyway, so you have a background as a journalist, and you have a career. You started out editing magazines and writing for different, what used to be called house organs, and covering corporate things. And then you turned into, or you added on, being a communications teacher, counselor, consultant for corporations. That what you have a career that makes some people want to slap you in the face. Why?
Right. Well, well, for one thing, you're right, and I've had some amazing luck with kind of scoring some amazing jobs early in my career. So right out of graduation, I mean, literally the Monday after we graduated from SMU, I started work as the editor of a business magazine called Southwest Business, which was one of the regional publications for purchasing agents in the United States. I did that for about 1.5 years, and then I was picked up as the assistant editor of the SMU Alumni Magazine. I did that for 2 months. The editor then left, and they named me the editor-in-chief. So right there, you know, that's enough to make a lot of people want to slap me, just because I kind of fell into, by amazing happenstance, some great jobs. And then took a job with Diamond Shamrock Oil Company here in Dallas, was picked to be editor of their employee publications. Did that for 2 years. Oil went kerplunk. And I was sitting around in my apartment going, okay, what am I going to do? Because I wasn't real crazy about the idea of going back into corporate work, a full-time job. I was kind of burned by that one. And I had a very good friend who's a professor at Berkeley who called me by coincidence. We were talking, and I told him what had happened. And he said, I said, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm getting ready to go off on a trip around the world for the summer. And, you know, like most friends who have that sort of thing going on, I said, you need somebody to carry your bags. And he said, well, no, not really. He goes, but I'd love for you to come on part of the trip if you could possibly swing it. And it got me thinking that, you know, as an editor at a company, I always had photographers who would contact me saying, hey, I'm going here, I'm going to, you know, Europe, I'm going to New Zealand. Can I take some photographs for you? And my answer was always, photographs mean nothing to me without a story. And so I thought, it's that classic example, you know, of American innovation. I thought, you know, maybe there's a market for somebody traveling outside the United States, writing articles about what GM or AT&T or IBM are doing in these countries. And I just, without realizing it, I hit on a gold mine. And so I did the 3-month trip around the world. I got enough business to break even on the 3-month trip around the world. And I said, that's good enough for me. I'm going to spend the summer traveling around the world. And I did. And then I got back and I was like, you know, I think with like some serious marketing, because I really only put that together. I put that trip together in about 6 weeks maximum. I said, this could be a business. So I proceeded to do that. And I would take one trip every year to Europe and one trip every year to the Far East in Australia. And I did that for 11 years and had assignments in 40 countries plus. Had some amazing experiences as a corporate freelance writer, basically, but focusing specifically on what American companies are doing in the rest of the world. And it was also happenstance and fortuitous on my part that it was at a time when American companies were really starting to globalize a lot. They'd been very North America focused up until kind of about 1980, and this was 1982 when I started. So I did that. I'll skip way ahead. My career evolved since then from being a freelance writer to going ahead and becoming a trainer of corporate writing teams, and then a consultant in corporate communication. And the good news is that come May 31st, my business will mark its 40th anniversary. Nonstop, never ever once looked back, never once had a major dearth in the business. And so that's why I think people probably would love to slap me, because, and it's all because I happen to somewhat luck upon some great ideas that carried me well throughout the years.
And so a moral for some people watching this is, to some extent, luck is what you make of it. Like, and
Yeah.
why not just take chances? And sometimes a crazy thing you think of turns out to be exactly what the world is looking for.
Absolutely. And where that applies to this topic today is the number one question I'm asked when I'm doing book readings around the country, or I'm at a book club, what have you, is, how does one start to become a novelist? And I say, you sit down at your computer and you start writing. I mean, yes, you can take classes. Yes, you can go to workshops. Yes, you can read all the books that have been written by the, William Faulkners or the Maya Angelou's of the world about how to be a writer. And that's great. And I would never, ever say that that's like worthless. But the most important thing is you start writing and not worry about whether what you're writing from the beginning is perfect or not. Because the great news is the more you write, the better you get at it. And we learned that in journalism. I mean, I think I remember, I don't know about you, but I remember that if we went a month without really having a meaningful assignment, that next assignment, we'd probably get a B- on or a C+. But when you were having to churn stuff out, and when I went on the staff at the Daily Campus, and we were having to write stuff day after day after day after day, your craft, you honed your craft pretty quickly. And it got better and better as time went on, and you were suddenly doing A work. So that's where that kind of applies to the art of writing books, I think.
Now, I recall decades ago when we were still in college, or maybe right afterwards, you were already collecting what we call string for a novel. You had some vignette. Somebody had told you about a couple divorcing and the husband being colorblind and the wife taking Polaroids of different ensembles that he had so that he could put his clothing together. And you thought it was so touching, and you thought, I want to write this in a novel someday. So you were talking about writing novels long, long ago. What made you decide, I'm getting off my butt and I'm actually going to finally do this?
Yeah, well, I actually was doing it a lot longer before that. When I was in first grade, a friend and I wrote a letter to Dr. Seuss offering to help him write his next book. And I had the whole title, I had the whole plot laid out, and we were in first grade. And much to my shock, he said, "Thanks, I'm good. I don't need any help with that."
And the title of this book was?
There's a Moose on the Loose on the Chicken Noose Trail. Now, where a first grader in Kansas came up with the idea of something called the Chicken Noose Trail, which to me sounds very Virginia, West Virginia, I will never know. But nonetheless, so writing's been in my blood. I mean, I remember sitting at a little tiny desk I had, before I ever got to kindergarten, and writing stories and writing and drawing. Unfortunately, my artistry is far inferior to my writing skills, but I was doing that. So it's in my blood. But you're right. At some point, you have to go, well, if I'm, I think that's it. I always wanted to be a novelist. I grew up reading the best novels ever written in my teenage years in high school and college and all that kind of thing, and after. But so I was 58 maybe 57. I had kind of a period where things were quiet. I was looking out ahead at my calendar. I thought, I'll probably pick up some additional work here, but I'm 57, 58, and I'm looking at a calendar that's got at least 3 or 4 or 5 months kind of open ish. Why not start? If not now, when? So I did. Interestingly enough, I started with Miami. I was starting to write Miami, and everything in my blood said, no, Manhattan, Murder Becomes Manhattan, ta-da, needs to be the first book in the series. And I knew I wanted to do a series. I was intrigued with the architecture of the Art Deco architecture of Miami Beach. So I kind of did research on that. But then I pulled back and I said, no, the first book needs to be Manhattan. So I retrenched and restarted. And once I kind of got where I was going in my head and moving forward, it just started happening. And again, it was one of the things where every night I'd sit down and say, well, I'll try to write, maybe a chapter or half a chapter. I'd write at least a chapter, maybe 2 in a night, in a day. And so it just built and built and built and started to become a thing. So, but I encourage people, anyone who's got the desire to be a novelist, I encourage them to not necessarily feel like I can only do it if I've got 4 months free in the calendar, because then you'll never get it done. I think you do say the 2 things I hear that I agree with. Try to pick a time that works for you. I write better at night. I feel like my work is my work, and I can kind of do that between 8 and 5, which doesn't mean I've never written during the middle of the day. I have a lot, but better for me would be to sit down at 7 o'clock, and by 9:30 or 10, I have written several pages at least. So find a time that works best for you. It might be first thing in the morning for you, or whatever it is. Find that time and then be consistent with that. Make it your novel time. And then try to do something every day, or at least in my case, I'll probably write 5 or 6 days a week. That's something. And so that's kind of my advice there.
Mm-hmm. Now I want to actually split this down into really tiny nano parts. All right, we've established you wanted to be a novelist. How did you hit on murder mysteries?
Okay, so I don't know that murder was really at first what I was thinking about, but I was totally gaga as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old boy with the Hardy Boys. And that then did move into Agatha Christie when I was 10, 11, 12, 13. So that's when murder started to happen. But, a lot of people ask me, they're like, how can you write about murder? And what my comeback to that is really, my books aren't about murder. They're about using the mind to find and capture a murderer. And I think it's a very different set. By the way, I've now done 10 chapters of the 4th book, which is going to be in Macau. And of those 4, you don't even experience the murder in 2 of them. And then you do in 1, Miami, and it's kind of grisly. But Miami, you got grisly city. You got to make it a grisly murder, right? But it's over quick. It's a very quick thing. And then in Macau, you experience her death, but it's sort of a bloodless death. She basically dies from poison. So it's not really about murder so much as the murder has happened, or it happens and it happens very quickly. Now, how do we assemble the clues? How do we avoid the red herrings, which are always in the books, of course? And my detective, Dalton Lee, who is an architect by trade, world-renowned architect, uses his skills of observation that he's developed as an architect to look at things, see things in certain ways, particularly buildings and structures and fences and gates and parapets and all that kind of stuff, to figure out who the murderer is. So they can capture that person, A, but then in capturing them, kind of put them under inquisition to find out what kind of terrorist plot the group that murderer invariably belongs to has up their sleeve. So it's more about use of the brain, I think, and being smart and figuring things out, reading between the lines, that sort of thing.
Which reminds me, kind of backs into it, you are a tremendous fan of puzzles. So essentially, you're crafting a gigantic, multi-layered puzzle here.
Exactly. And in at least 2 or 3 of the books, Dalton is working on an acrostic. At some point, I've constructed puzzles for the New York Times that have been published, but I decided New York crossword puzzles were maybe a little too pat. So I wanted to come up with something else. And I've kind of gotten into, in the last several years, I've started enjoying acrostics, and particularly those that are in the New York Times Magazine on Sunday. And I thought that might be a little more fun for Dalton to play with. So he's doing puzzles, and the books themselves are puzzles. So you're absolutely right.
A couple of asides here. First off, you've had a crossword puzzle or 3 published in the New York Times. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. And we together as a team
Yes.
competed in a New York Times crossword puzzle solving contest for which I flew from Houston to Dallas. It was an anti-Super Bowl Sunday event, and we finished it in, I do believe, 9 minutes.
Yeah.
And someone
and I was 3 steps behind the person who got their answer in first, which really, first of all, I can't believe they didn't have a prize for second place. How dare they? And then third, I can't believe I didn't trip him as he was on his way up to deliver. And I can't believe I wasn't faster. I apologize profusely.
Well, I just think it's hysterical. 9 minutes coming in second, working this puzzle, and somebody beat us. Like, wow. Yeah. Okay. So that's, I had to throw that in. And also,
before you go on, I'm going to mention one more thing about that. And that is that one of the things I loved about that, as I'm sure you will recall, was back when we still had bookstores. It was at a Borders bookstore where we did that. And all of the major answers in the puzzle used the word border in them. So border patrol, on the border, run for the border, those kinds of things. And that's the kind of wordplay that I try to put into the books as well. It's that kind of multi-layer. It's not just this word, another word for this. There's a whole multi-level layer of wording and wordplay and all that going on in the books as well. So,
and you, for the release of the first book, Murder Becomes Manhattan, you constructed a fairly elaborate puzzle contest, as I recall.
That's right. And who won that contest?
Oh, gee. And my current trivia partner. We're
not at all
winning restaurant certificates here in Northern New Jersey now.
Yeah. I had a couple of people in Manhattan who were very upset with me, by the way, who were also playing, that couldn't believe that you knew Manhattan better than they did when they lived there. So
fools. Whoops. Anyway, going back to your book, let's talk about how you created Dalton Lee.
I have no idea.
But did he just appear to you? Madeline Langle said
it's one of those situations where, because people ask about the writing process, and all I can tell them is, I sit down and it's just like it's like my mind becomes a portal and a movie starts playing and I see the people and I hear their dialogue and I see the room around them. Sometimes I have to do a little squint of the mind's eye to try to capture some more detail, but usually not even that so much. And so I'm really almost like recording, as fast as I can, what's the real that's playing out in front of my mind. And Dalton, it actually would be very interesting to have a psychiatrist like lay me on a couch and go, let's talk about your life, and then figure out who Dalton really is and where Dalton actually came from. I have no background in architecture. I love architecture. I became quite enamored of it traveling around the world with my freelance writing business. And that was maybe his being an architect did come about from, I had to come up with a device. Who is this person who ends up having to go to different places around the world? What would make sense? And there aren't a whole lot of professions that necessarily you can connect with that. So when I thought of architect, I thought, oh my gosh, so this guy is going to kind of be like a Mies van der Rohe or I guess he was more of a furniture designer, but a style designer architect, and is going an I.M. Pei, what have you. And that formed his kind of persona to some degree. Now, his weird quirks as a person, having conversations with inanimate objects, for example, a mannequin.
Oh, I forgot about that one. He talks to inanimate objects.
Yes, talks to inanimate objects. I don't think I do that, but maybe we all do, and we're not aware of that. Who knows?
And he gets actual information from them, right?
Yes, he does. Yes. That he's socially awkward. He's hard to commit. It's hard for him to commit on lots of levels to things. So he's always kind of looking at people through squinted eyes, and do I really want to go in that room? Must I? And yet at the same time, he has this enormous heart at the same time, which really shows up at the end of book 1 for sure, and of Manhattan. So I don't know. You just let a character develop as you write him or her. And it's the same with all the other people. He has a team that travels with him everywhere. There's a reason why they're with him, which I won't spoil for the readers. Yes, they're all architects in a way, or they work for the architecture firm. But there's another layer there, as you well know, of why they're traveling with him on these kind of surreptitious trips to where a murder has happened and try to figure out who the murderer is. And they're all characters of their own as well. And then there's others, like every time they go into a city, they are interacting with a local police person of some sort. And probably one of the favorite characters I have ever written is the woman CJ, who is with Scotland Yard in The Murder Becomes Mayfair. But that's what you already held that one up. We don't need to hold that one up again. CJ, as I mentioned in the first description of her, comes into the room like a Romanian wrestler approaching the mat. And so she has a bowl haircut. And she as someone not far from me right now said, that it would have to be in the movie, it would have to be portrayed by Elsa Lancaster. It'd be that kind. She's that kind of character for whatever. And I would, in writing the book, I'd get into these sections with CJ, working with, interacting with Dalton, or just conducting an investigation, and I would just burst into tears laughing over her, and where she came from, I have no idea. So it's the joy, the mystery of writing, is that you see people in your mind's eye, and if you allow yourself to be open and let them talk and let them come into the room dressed the way they are, and you just describe it without any judgment attached and without judging what you're seeing or hearing, then you're going to create some really fascinating characters.
Why specifically? Dalton Lee has his signature food and signature call liquor. How did this come about?
Well, that's where there is a little bit of me in the character, I guess. I've always, as a kid, it was always that, grilled cheese sandwich with, 2 dill pickles or the little patty types, not the pickle, but the round hamburger patty. And I thought it would be fun, again, for him to have. To me, that's about building character in depth. And, a lot of people will send me stuff they've written, and ask me to review it. And one of the things I often tell them is, after about, I'd say not more than about 60 or 70 pages, a reader ought to be able to come away going, this is what the person likes to drink, this is what the person likes to wear, this is the kind of music this person likes, this is what they like to eat. Try not to do it in a way that's too heavy-handed. But grilled cheese just seemed to be, I can remember even my mother would sometimes make a grilled cheese sandwich and she'd use a different cheese than, like American or whatever. And I'd be appalled. It'd be like, I'd actually take it up to her and go, this isn't your normal. So that is Dalton for sure, as you well know. It's very likely for Dalton to go marching into the kitchen at a restaurant and push the chef aside and go, no, 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 no. you're not doing this right, as he does in Mayfair, I believe it is. So that's definitely me. Buffalo Trace bourbon, I'm a bourbon drinker in the winter. And although I have kind of, sometimes I've like slid over to rye. And I did a little bit of research on what were some interesting boutique bourbons, and Buffalo Trace, I'd never heard of it. And it's one of those things, I kid you not, I'd never heard of it, made it his bourbon, and then like suddenly every restaurant we were going into, bourbon was Buffalo Trace would be on the menu. It was remarkable, although you know how it is with us, and there are no coincidences.
We collect
but yeah, it really, I'd never heard of it before I picked it. Said, well, this sounds kind of interesting. Why not? So, and then now it's everywhere.
Yeah. All right. And Dalton also has a certain vehicle that's very special that gets carried around.
Yep. Yeah, he's got, it's like a Vespa, only again, that is a piece of advice I have for anyone writing. And that is, you know, you're gonna have, when it comes to building characters or describing places, there will be certain things that come to mind immediately. So I wanted him to have a scooter. The first one that came to mind was Vespa. And I said, nope, I'm not going to go with the obvious. So I did a little research and I fell in love with yet another Italian scooter from the 1950s called a Micoletta, Maicoletta. Dalton does not have it with him yet in Macau. I haven't quite decided whether we need to have a conversation about that. And I need to have him explain to the team why the Micoletta is not there. Although Hong Kong would be a perfect place to have it. It's, you know, dense as can be, and Macau and all of that little area. Yeah, so he drives a 1950s style Italian vintage, outstanding turquoise blue with a red seat, I believe, Micoletta that he will ship to whatever exotic locale they are trying to solve a murder, because he really likes to drive his Micoletta.
That explains a few things. I am wondering, do you actually chart out your plot? Do you chart out the story arc, or do you let it reveal itself to you?
That's an outstanding question on several levels. The quick answer is both. It's born from the fact I was probably about 7 or 8 chapters into Manhattan when I suddenly realized I had dropped a whole lot of details, a couple of red herrings into the book, and suddenly went, oh my God, I've got to like somehow pull this all together, and I can't even remember what I've written so far. So that taught me of the lesson of you've really got to have some kind of outline, something, you know, to make sure your book doesn't get laughed at by readers going, you said that she was a brunette in chapter 3, but then in chapter 9, you said she was bald. So you want to avoid those inconsistencies, incongruities for sure. So I backtracked with Manhattan, sat down, kind of plotted it out more. And then with Miami, that was the first thing I did. And actually now I do it with every book. First thing I do is sit down. And what that also enables me to do, it's not just outlining the plot. What outlining the book also enables me to do is make sure there's interesting balance within the book from start to finish, meaning long chapter, very short chapter, medium chapter, very short chapter, longer chapter. That you make sure that the book doesn't seem pedantic from chapter to chapter to chapter to chapter, that every chapter ends up being somewhere between 7 and 9 pages long. There's variety there. It enables me to have variety of locations. So a chapter in the hotel, a chapter out, you know, a chapter in Dalton's head. You're able to also bring layers of interest to the book that way, and outlining before you ever start writing helps me do that. And then there's also the making sure that, okay, I lay out something in chapter 7, we'll say. You don't want to wait until chapter 29 to come back to that. It's too long a gap. What that gap is, entirely up to you, but I like to say, okay, I need to come back to that somewhere around 13, 14, 15. And then if there's going to be a third circle back, okay, that needs to be kind of 20, 22, 23, somewhere in there. And so all of that gets accomplished by doing an outline from the very front. Now, the other thing you said was, or do you let it unfold? I have started chapters thinking this is where I'm going to take it. And they've gone somewhere utterly different by the time I was over, and always for the better. There's a chapter I read in almost every one of my book clubs now, book club appearances, because it gets so much response. And it's Dalton asking a taxi driver to take him to go look at a house in Miami. And I won't spoil it, but the book ends very dramatically in a way I never, ever expected it to when I sat down and started that chapter. And it's not a very long chapter. It's maybe, I don't know, 6, 7 pages, 7 or 8. So the answer is both. I do plot out a lot of the book up front, so I then have a structure to write to, but I always give myself the freedom to let a chapter, a character, they're walking across a bridge, maybe having a conversation, and suddenly the person with Dalton turns and decides to jump off the bridge into the river. I mean, and that may just literally pop into my mind while I'm in mid-chapter. And so the answer is both.
So you've talked a lot about the how you come up with the structure and outlining that, but do you actually research for each book or do some serious thinking about the crime, like what it's going to be, who's going to be involved, how it's going to be pulled off, the actual modality, even though it doesn't necessarily happen in the book, it may have happened off the page, but how do you get this kind of information? You just research a lot? Do you have a devious mind? What happens?
Yeah. I'd say for sure to all that. Well, there's one of the things that boggled my mind. We went to a murder mystery writer convention in Nashville about 5 years ago. And there's like entire seminars devoted to things like different knives and how they'll go into people's bodies, or different poisons and how long it takes for them to activate within the system. And I was sort of like, really? You're kidding me. My God. And I totally get, I would like to be as accurate as I possibly can, with my writing. At the same time, these books are fantasy. And I think I write them in a way where that kind of journalistic detail and accuracy isn't necessarily all that important. It is obviously if you're presenting a premise, or here's how the person was murdered and here's when they were murdered and all that kind of thing. And smart readers go, that couldn't be. That doesn't happen. You're defying the laws of physics. I don't want that to happen. But I think that because the books have sort of the fun fantasy aspect to them, that gives me the freedom to have a little bit of literary license to make those kind of details maybe not quite so, on target 100%. I want them to be 90 to 95%, and I do research for sure. If the woman's going to be poisoned by arsenic, and I'm also saying in the book that, it happens immediately, or she ingested it 8 hours ago, I'm going to go do the research because I'm a journalist. And I bring a lot of journalistic research into all the books, particularly when it comes to the locations, more of that than anything else. And so I want it to be on target. I'm going to go check that out and go, okay, does this meet the smell test here? And if it doesn't, then I have to go, find a different solution there. So I'm doing research and I do care about it, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if, a detective. Actually, that brings up a very interesting story if we have a moment.
All right, please.
In Manhattan, I have I make reference to the fact that detectives now can tell where you've been for a few months prior to their pulling the hair out of your head, based on water, the water systems. That the water system. This is all research. I was doing research, and I was even like going, "Wow, this is incredible! I need to put this in the book." Where they've mapped all the water systems and the like different pH levels and contents of water systems all over the world. And so if someone came and plucked the hair out of your head, the detective can now run that through a system that will say, Kathy was in northern New Jersey for the last 3 weeks. Prior to that, she was in Dallas for 2 weeks. Before that, she was in Fiji for over a month. And so I put that in the book. So I have a local DA who bought the book, was reading. He goes, "Okay, this just," and I said, no, seriously, this is like new stuff. So I sent him a link to the article from England, because England was where they kind of initiated the whole thing. And he wrote me back. He goes, "You do not have any idea how much easier you have just made my job. This is incredible. This is remarkable." And he was thrilled and delighted. So there's a good story about research is very important to me because of our journalistic training. I want the books to be very, 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 very accurate. I use goodwill. I give a free book to editors for different parts of each book. You, of course, have been one of those. The sections devoted to Delfina Delgado, a fraud psychic. You're not a fraud, of course, but you know the terminology. You know what those sessions could be like. So I do that with every book. In Manhattan, part of it takes place at St. John's in New York, an Episcopal church up on the Upper West Side. And I have an Episcopal minister here who sat down and went through those chapters and gave me incredible, nuanced reactions to things. This is the word you should use rather than that word. That wouldn't be on top of that. It would be beside it during the service, all that kind of stuff. And I drink that stuff up and plug it in because I just know it's going to make the books more readable and more interesting.
Haven't you been on the ground in all of these locations, though, for starters?
Just Miami. But I will tell you, being on the ground is enormously beneficial. My lovely story about in Miami was we completely driving through Miami, just outside Coral Gables, stumbled upon a cemetery that is the cemetery that all the people who founded Coral Gables, is either Coral Gables or Coconut Grove. Now I may be a little confused. There's one of the two, where they're all buried. But this isn't like every other, cemetery out there. There were tombstones for like city founders that were like this big by this big, leaning against a tree, the base of a tree. The entire cemetery is shrouded by palm trees and other South Florida trees. So you take 6 steps into the cemetery and it's almost dark at 2 p.m. There are little benches, like picnic benches. I hope there aren't people taking picnics in this place, because that would be a little weird, but whatever. And they were scattered throughout. And I was just like, okay, there is going to be a chapter devoted to this cemetery, take place in this cemetery. And in fact, as you know, Dalton has this sort of mysterious confidant who seems to be attached to the terrorist group, who's giving him little hints of details along the way. And they have a meeting in that cemetery. There is no way that cemetery chapter, which is a terrific chapter, ever would have come about had we not just driving around, stumbled on it, got out of the car, went to explore it, and was kind of blown away by it. So Manhattan, I'm hoping that we'll be able to get to Macau. I have been to Hong Kong itself 8 times. I want to go back. It's one of my favorite cities, but right now is not a great time to be going to Hong Kong for a whole variety of reasons, from revolt to coronavirus to, everything. So we'll see. And then Mayfair, I just was not, I had a lot of work. And I just didn't have the time to go jetting off to London and spend a week gobbling up detail. So I did a whole lot of time on Google to write that book.
But you've previously been in London.
Oh yeah. I've
So
been
my
to all.
point is, you do have some physical
Yes.
familiarity with these locations.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you were in Miami, didn't you end up like in a hotel or motel with a window looking out over a parking lot wall that had a giant M painted on it?
Yes. Yeah. It was, if I remember correctly, I want to say it was the foliage. And I can't remember what it was.
It was
but
a
it
weird
was a
architectural
weird thing, and
design
it
that
was
made
the
it.
letter M.
Mhm.
And just so everyone knows, all the books are MM. Murder Becomes Manhattan, Murder Becomes Miami, Murder Becomes Mayfair, and the next one, Murder Becomes Macau. There's lots of places around the world. There's no way I could exhaust the possibilities before I die. So that's one of the reasons we picked that. We thought it was kind of fun. And yeah, I'm just looking out the window and I'm going, oh my God, look at that. And it was a big letter M in the parking area, either the foliage on the wall or on the parking space for no apparent reason, but it was there.
Yeah, just things saying hi to you.
Yeah.
Oh, and our Tasmanian connection is suggesting Murder Becomes Melbourne.
You better believe it. You better believe it. Yeah.
There are some really fun aspects to the Kindle version of your book. You make use of hyperlinks, hypertext.
Yes. Yeah, that, and I got to tell you, everybody tells me, I was a little worried. I thought, will hyperlinks throughout a book feel too distracting? And hands down, everybody who we've really kind of probed that, because if it's irritating or annoying, we want to stop doing it. But everybody agrees that they love it. And to this day, I don't know anybody else who's doing it. And it just boggles my mind, because it makes the Kindle, Kobo, Apple book version, the digital versions of the books, so interesting, in that if Dalton's taking a group of people on a tour, as he does, of the Art Deco hotels in Miami, when he mentions one, you can click on it and you will see that hotel in the book. The murder weapon, you can click on it, there's the murder weapon. I know in Manhattan, somebody's body is found in a dumpster. You click on that, there's the dumpster, picture of the dumpster. And then it's a very quick thing. It's just a photograph, and then you can click out and go right back to reading. But it does enhance your ability to have a multi-sensual experience with the book that just a regular book. It's all in your mind's eye, which is fine. But when it comes to things like the architecture, that's where it becomes, in my mind, an incredibly valuable thing. So when I mentioned the Seagram's building, if you don't have that institutional visual of what the Seagram's building is like in New York, all you got to do is click on it, and then you see it. And then what you're reading about why it's so important, or some interesting architectural feature about it, suddenly becomes that much more compelling, because you're seeing it not in real time, but you're seeing a photograph of it, an image of it. So yeah, it's and then one of the other things about that component that I think it's interesting to share is I wanted to be very careful not to overdo it. And so typically I'll kind of pack the hyperlinks kind of early to mid throughout the book. There'll still be some in the latter chapters. But what I learned with Manhattan was, although I could have done it, I absolutely stopped including hyperlinks as the book was coming to its climax. There's a very important chase scene near the end of Manhattan. There's a lot of tension involved. And I thought, if I distracted the reader now, that would probably be detrimental. So you'll find that probably the last 8 chapters may have no hyperlinks, because I want the reader to really, at this point, be kind of gripping their seat. And I don't want something to distract them from that.
We haven't talked about how you selected your pseudonym. This isn't a usual story at all. Not that there is for a pseudonym. I guess everybody has a very distinctive way they go about it, but there's some really cool stuff in Jeffrey Eaton's Genesis story. What's his
Right,
origin?
there is. Yeah, three reasons why. Number one is that Eaton is a lot shorter than my real name, Harrington. So getting, Eaton here on the cover of the book is a lot easier than if it were Harrington. It would be out here probably. So that's one reason. We thought it condense everything, make it cleaner, tighter, what have you. Secondly, I'm only blanking on one of them, but the most important one, of course, the one I know you're referring to. Oh, the second one is,
isn't it?
if I want privacy, if I want some privacy, if I want to go off and write like more serious literature at some point, then I can use my real name or another pseudonym, and there won't be a connection. But the real, as you say, the really fun reason is that my father was a dancer in the vaudeville circuit, and then also in motion pictures. He was in the movie that Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz met in. And my mother actually would sit on the side of the set and chat up with Lucille Ball back then. They were both redheads, so they hit it off immediately. And apparently somebody told me that the movie is mentioned in the movie Being the Ricardos, that there's a mention of it within that movie. But anyway, and my father's dance name was Jerry Eaton, is what he went by. So it's a bit of an homage to my father. I thought, if I'm going to pick a pseudonym, why not pick the same one he used? I kind of just like the name Jeffrey Eaton. It sounds very literary.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so you're working on your fourth one.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see any kind of development or storyline going through the books? Like, do you see an arc or a way the characters or the situations are developing?
Yeah, there's there's kind of several ways, but Dalton in particular has a very he has something that starts in Mayfair, and it's just sort of it's brought up. Let me back up this a little bit. One of the things I've tried to do with the books to make them more interesting, more compelling, more substantial, is to have everybody kind of has their own storyline, and without too many spoilers, not every character survives to the next book necessarily, but if they do survive, then that story sometimes carries on to the next book. Not always. Sometimes a storyline is within a book, but the characters will continue, and some storylines of a character will continue. And so Dalton has something that starts to happen in Mayfair, and it becomes a big dang deal in Macau, and it involves. I'm trying to figure out a way I can say it without giving anything away, but he starts to feel very, very vulnerable in a way he has not felt prior. And so that's kind of an example of, yes, there are storylines that go from book to book to book, and people evolve to a certain degree. And then there is, I think it is okay to say that all of the people on this team, as I referenced earlier, alluded to earlier, have this reason why they're on the team. And it involves loved ones of theirs. And at the end of every book, someone's loved one gets rescued and returned to them. But you're not sure who it's going to be until the very, very, very end of the book. So that's when you learn that someone is not coming back in the next book. But there's almost always someone new who shows up, who joins the team because they've had someone that they care about who's been now abducted by the terrorist group. So there is that. Other than that, though, the characters generally, they've kind of got their, like us, they know who they are. They've kind of got their personality in place, and I try to write true to that. Although I do try to have people change and evolve a little bit from book to book to book.
And at some point later this year, maybe if the stars align, is when Murder Becomes Macau will come out.
My hope would be I'd love to have it out kind of around Christmas time, a little before. we'll see. There's a lot going on, but I'm 10 chapters in, and it's probably going to be about a 50 chapter book, 45, 50 chapter book. So writing 2 or 3 chapters a week. I should, if I don't have a lot of other stuff pop up, we'll see. Maybe have the writing done by the end of the summer. That would be the hope. And then it's production from that point on, editing and production and all that kind of thing. You know, one thing I think might be interesting to bring up, Kathy, I think we have a little time. Yeah, we do.
Go ahead.
Is one thing that, as I was talking about something earlier, it made me think about in Manhattan. At the end of the book, there's this scene that's very, very dramatic. In fact, everybody tells me they just can't put the book down. It's one of those where they're really like stuck as this thing is unfolding near the end of the book. And I really wanted that chapter. I wanted the chapter actually unfolds over about 2 chapters, I guess. I wanted it to have this real, incredible sense of impact or suspense, really is the right word for it. And so what I did, in the back of my mind, I asked myself, and so this is more advice to anybody who wants to be a writer, is I asked myself, okay, what do I recall? What comes into my mind as a great book or a great film or a great stage play even, where the suspense had me, galvanized. And for me, it's the scene at the end of The Man Who Knows Too Much. Yeah, Hitchcock thriller with Doris Day and Jimmy Stewart. And their son is being held captive. And someone in Doris Day is a world-renowned concert pianist. She's giving a concert, and there's a murderer who's going to assassinate someone, an official in the audience. And I just remember when I saw that, first time I saw that, it just blew me away. So I rented the movie, and I really zeroed in on that scene. And why was this so suspenseful? And what I learned from it is the reason is you saw this scene unfolding from 3 different perspectives.
Mm.
You saw it from Doris Day's perspective. She's playing on the piano and she's singing very loudly the song she's playing because it was a lullaby she used to sing to her son, who's now abducted and they think is somewhere in the building. So she's doing that. You see it from her perspective. You see it from the murderer's perspective when his gun comes out through a curtain, just the barrel of the gun. And then you see it from Jimmy Stewart's standpoint, who is running to get to the theater to try to stop this from happening as quickly as he possibly can, because he's learned that this assassination is about to happen. And it's back and forth. You see of one to the other to the other. And so that's the way I built that scene in Manhattan, was to have it from different people's perspectives. And I think it worked, because everybody tells me who reads the book that they were truly held in significant suspense at the end of that first book in particular. So it's a great thing to hone your craft, is just ask yourself where else, when else, whatever it is. But maybe it's a romantic scene. Maybe it's a scene of someone grieving or mourning over something. Where have you experienced that before in your own survey of the arts? And go find it and study it, and study what are the nuances here that made that so compelling. And then you'll know how to deliver it in your own work.
Excellent, excellent advice. Thank you. Is there anything else you would like to say to the world at large before we wrap up today?
Just that I very quickly, I lament the movement that's happening underway to prevent children from reading books that take them to a world beyond the one they know. Mm-hmm. I think it's abhorrent, to be quite honest. For children to become empathetic adults, they must read books about people whose lives are very different from theirs and different communities from where they live. So I encourage you, if you are a lover of books, a lover of literature, a lover of reading, to make sure your elected officials know that you are against any kind of book bans. And so with that, I'll just let everyone know that I hope that they always keep a little mystery in their life.
Oh, that's a great tagline. And your website where people can find your books is?
murderbecomes.com. Think morning becomes Electra. Murder becomes and then you can find them all on Amazon Kindle for sure.
Yeah, I have nice big hardbacks. It has a special bookmark in it.
Nice.
A mug. I got the whole outfit. Thanks a bunch, Jeff. This was great. I'm so glad
Thank
you
you
had
so
time
much,
to
Kathy,
talk.
for having me. And for whoever sees this, I hope that you will rush and to your bookcase right now and read whatever great book you find there. Don't procrastinate. Read it tonight.
Excellent. Maybe it'll be about a moose for Dr.
It might,
You got to write
it
that
might
book.
be. You never know. If it's
All
on
right.
the Chicken News Trail, I want to know because I should be getting some money off of that.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.